I am Rie with Karuna Yoga Teacher Training Programs, and I'm going to talk to you about the dynamic action cues of Tadasana and my cat. Dynamic action cues allow us to safely cue individual bodies, no matter what the shape or size of those bodies. Dynamic action cues are usually centered around a joint, and they move one body part in one direction and a different body part in an opposing or different direction. And these actions together bring balance to the structure. This balance is centered around the central axis of the individual. Let's take a look at the dynamic action cues for Tadasana. We start with the foundation. So we're going to move the four corners of each foot down into the floor. We're going to bring the inner ankle bones closer together and take the outer ankle bones down towards the ground. The top of the shin bone moves forward, bending the knee while the kneecap lifts up towards the pelvis. The inner thighs swivel towards the back of the room while the tailbone releases down to the ground. The four sides of the torso elongate. We widen through the collarbones and widen through the shoulder blades. Elongate through the four sides of the neck. And take the back of the skull towards the back, lifting up through the crown of the head and release the jaw. Now please remember that dynamic action cues are two cues put together. If you only utilize one piece of a dynamic action cue, you're actually going to take the body further out of alignment. Let's take a look at each little piece. First, the feet. If we were just to take the big toe ball mound down into the floor, the pinky toe ball mound would start to lift up. If we take just the pinky toe ball mound down into the floor, then that causes the foot to roll outward. It is the use of all four corners of the foot moving down into the floor which brings balance. Now let's take a look at the ankles. If we just brought the inner ankle bones towards each other, then again we have the foot rolling towards the midline of the body. If we just move the outer ankle bones closer to the floor, then we cause what's called a supinated foot. So we want to move in both directions. The inner ankle bones come towards each other as the outer ankle bones move down towards the floor. This cue is especially important if you're dealing with people who have issues with a supinated or pronated foot. Let's look at the cues that surround the action of the knee joint. For this cue, we take the top of the shin bones forward, which causes a bending of the knee. At the same time, we engage the quadriceps, lifting the kneecap up towards the hip bones. If we only took the shin forward, we would continue to bend the knees. If we only engage the quadriceps and lift the kneecaps up, then we end up with hyperextended knees. The two cues of moving the shin bones forward and lifting the kneecaps up bring the knees into alignment with each leg's central axis. We're going to look at the dynamic action cues surrounding the pelvis from a couple of different angles. First, from the front. The action cues are like so. Inner thighs spin towards the back while the tailbone releases towards the ground. The side view of the dynamic actions for the pelvis are going to give you a better idea of what's going on. We take the inner thighs, roll them towards the back, and release the tailbone down to the ground. If we take the dynamic action cues apart and only roll the inner thighs towards the back, what we end up with is hyperlordosis. If we only take the cue of tailbone releasing down towards the ground, then we end up with a tucked pelvis. It's important that all dynamic action cues be done together. Inner thighs roll to the back as the tailbone moves down to the ground. This brings the structure of the pelvis into balance with the individual body's central axis. Next, we're going to move up the body into the rib cage. The dynamic action cue is to lift all four sides of the rib cage evenly. If we were to take those cues apart and lift just the front of the rib cage, then we end up with a different alignment. If we lifted just the back of the rib cage, the body would look somewhat like this. And if we were to lift just the sides of the rib cage up, then something like this would happen. Our dynamic action cues for the shoulders tie into the dynamic action cues for the neck. For the shoulders, we widen through the collarbones and widen through the shoulder blades. We extend the four sides of the neck up while releasing the shoulders down. Let's look at what happens if we take these dynamic action cues individually. If we only widen through the collarbones, then that ends up moving the rib cage too far forward. If we only widen through the shoulder blades, then we end up with the opposite happening. So to widen through the collarbones and the shoulder blades brings the shoulder girdle right into alignment with the central axis. We put the neck and the shoulders together here because they kind of interact in a dynamic way. If we were to merely move the shoulders down away from the ears, what we would have is excess tension in the shoulders. And this is not what yoga is about. Yoga is about finding balance. So instead of just cueing the shoulders, we cue the neck and shoulders together. We have a lifting up of the four sides of the neck while the shoulders release down. This way we create length without creating excess tension. Now let's take a look at the head and how the dynamic action cues work here. Here, we lift the crown of the head up while releasing the jaw. Another way to say this is to take the back of the skull back a little bit, lifting up as we release the jaw. If we were to only give the cue to lift the head up, this is often what occurs. We want to include a cue that releases the jaw down to help bring the skull into alignment with the central axis of the body. Now, just for review, dynamic action cues include two cues which move a body part in one direction and also in another direction, a different direction. This brings both parts into alignment with the central axis of the body. It's important to deliver these cues as a pair. Remember, Karuna trainees, that Tadasana is a fundamental pose. That means you will find pieces of Tadasana in every other pose that there is. To learn the dynamic action cues of Tadasana is to learn cueing for all asana, at least in part. I hope this was helpful.